Hi everyone. Hi Andrew. Oh, you should be
Hi,
able to
Isabel.
unmute yourself. Yeah. Great.
Hi, Isabel. Just to let you know, Annie will be doing the introductions.
Okay.
Annie's the director of our international office. But I think we'll probably just wait maybe a couple of minutes for everybody to join, because I think we don't use Zoom, you see, we use Skype for Business, so I think there might be a few people waiting to log in.
Sure. No worries. I'll keep an eye and I'll keep admitting people, and then
Thank
let me
you.
know when you're ready, and then
I was just going to ask who's got the entry button, who's holding the door keys? Is it you, Isabel?
yeah, that's right. Just keep my finger over the button to click in. So.
Great. We'll just give it another couple of minutes if that's okay. I know we had more on the invite list than I can see here in front of me.
Sure.
I'll just take this opportunity to turn everything else off. Right, we've got looks like I've got 23 on the call now. Andy, is that about what we were expecting? Oh, see one more on. Is that roughly what we were expecting? 25 now?
Yeah, that's 25 we were hoping for. So I think this looks about right, I would say.
Okay, well, let's make a start. Oops, hang on, I've just lost my notes. Excuse me a second. So I have got some little bullet points here, which is it's a bit bizarre working on two screens, as I'm sure you're all aware of. So you are occasionally going to see the side of my face as I flip over to my notes on my other screen. So I'd just like to say good afternoon to everyone. I think I know most names on here, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Annie Brunt. I'm the director of the international office. As you are probably all aware, and is one of the reasons why you've all elected to come onto this call today, China is an incredibly important part of our international strategy, and success in this market is going to enable us to meet our objectives for our internationalization strategy. So over the last couple of years, we have been ramping up the activity that we do in China. And whilst we can't travel right now, an increasing number of man-met staff from the faculties and from professional services are increasingly getting engaged with our work in China. So we thought it'd be useful to have this particular session on the very important subject of Chinese business culture. I'm delighted to have a couple of external guests from the China-Britain Business Council, CBBC, to host this bespoke training session. And if you'd like to give us a wave, CBBC, that would be no, thank you very much. CBBC is one of the leading British organisations promoting trade and investment in industry between UK and China. And the objective of CBBC is to help assist UK organisations do business in China, work with Chinese companies, partner with China, and also UK-China partnerships in third markets as well. Manchester Met is a partner. We are not a partner, rather a member organisation of CBBC, and as such we benefit from a range of services and expertise provided by their services in both UK and China. And one thing to add is most of you will know that we do have an office based in Wuhan, in the Hubei province. We are moving to new premises there, and we're moving to premises next door to the British consulate, and there's also a CBBC member of staff right next door to us as well. So I'm sure we'll be able to pick even more brains as we carry on. So I'm delighted to welcome Isabel and Tom today. Thomas Claiborne is going to be hosting today's session. And he'll be giving you a little bit more information, I would imagine, on how we're going to run the session today. Thomas is the China Market Business Advisor for Education for CBBC. And just by a quick way of introduction, and you're going to see a little bit more of the side of my face whilst I do this, read more from my notes here. Thomas is a fluent Mandarin speaker and has significant work experience in the education sector. Holds a master's degree in politics and media in East Asia from University of Sheffield, and has a bachelor's degree from down the road from us at University of Manchester in Chinese studies. He spent 4 years studying and working in China, so I think we've got a really valuable asset with us today to help us through this. Thomas has taught English at a number of Chinese universities before working with the British Council in Beijing, who is also another very useful organisation for us to be engaging with as well. Coming back to the UK, Thomas has worked for the University of Derby and Hafast People before joining the CBBC. So without me continuing any further, I'd now like to hand over to Thomas, if that's okay. And I think you're going to do a little bit of an overview of how we're going to conduct the session, and perhaps you'd like to tell us how you'd like to deal with questions, whether you want them ongoing or maybe at the end or at certain points during the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Annie. I think you've done a great job of introducing me. That saves me a job, but there is a bit in my slides about me, but I won't dwell on them when I get to my slides. I'd also like to introduce my colleague Isabel Kernock, who is our Assistant Director of our Premium Member Programme, who is hosting Zoom and is going to be making sure it all goes smoothly because she's got far better Zoom skills than me. So Isabel, would you like to introduce yourself and what role you play with respect to our Premium Members and our Premium Member Programme, briefly?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all on the line. As Tom mentioned, I look after the Premium Member Programme at CBBC. So I organise a range of activities for all our premium members. So they range from education sector to financial and professional services to energy, creative. I look to organise policy briefings, invite think tanks, academics to give us just these premium roundtable briefings. At the moment, obviously, we're doing it all on Zoom until we can host in-person meetings. But it's a really good opportunity, I'm finding, to engage with speakers in America and speakers in China to brief our premium members. So if you're ever interested in listening in on any of these sessions, joining these sessions, just let me know. Premium members, we can also send you China policy updates, which kind of look at what's going on in China, what that means for UK business. And these are prepared by our China policy analyst. So Tom is kind of the sector person for you. So any sector education specific questions always go to Tom, but I'm here for kind of government engagement, policy advice, access, any other general questions you may have. Feel free to just throw them my way and I'll be able to direct you to the right colleague. Yeah, anyway, Tom, I'll let you continue with this.
Thanks, Isabel. I'm going to try and share my screen. We're going to see how this goes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Brilliant. Try and make it a slideshow. Okay, so I won't dwell on the slide about me, but I am Tom and I'm the China Market Business Advisor at CBBC, and I'm your main contact as a member of CBBC. And as Annie said, I've got over 10 years experience working in the education sector, and just giving you my background, so I won't need to do that. And my role is really to help support education sector organisations to enter and grow in the Chinese market. China Britain Business Council, Annie has already sort of said what we do, but I do want to spend a couple of seconds just adding a few bits in here. We have a large network in China with over 13 offices, which can help businesses. Within those offices, we have a number of sector-specific staff. So we have an education team in China alongside myself and my colleague Jodie Chow, who is based in London, and they can basically help with any needs. We do a lot of event organisation and support, government relationship building activities, kind of events when, well, in the normal circumstances, we have Chinese delegations visiting the UK, and we support our UK members to engage with those government or businesses that are coming over to visit. The same from inward missions to China, we have a lot. We do a lot in areas around anything where education meets with business meets with funding. So the employability agenda, for example, is high on our list of areas we engage. And we can also help, we also have a lot of services for sort of market research or partner identification. So if you're looking for specific partners in China or want to be able to engage or reach out to someone in a specific province or specific city, we can help you do that. We are service focused and not for profit. We have over 600 members of CBBC, and in 2018 we helped UK business generate over £720 million of export wins. So this is where a contract or an agreement is signed, and we've helped support that contract or agreement be signed. We kind of tick it off as an export win for the UK. This is a brief agenda of today. I've got about 30 slides, I think, to get through. It's a bit of a crash course in all things China, history, culture, language, kind of business meetings, what to expect, what to think about with kind of etiquette, communication, where miscommunications might happen. I know on the call we've got people with lots of knowledge of China and maybe some with less, so I'm going to just whiz through it. And I think the session is kind of planned for an hour and a half, so I'm going to go through the presentation and then leave about half an hour, hopefully, for questions or a discussion at the end of the presentation. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So without further ado, I've got some quiz questions. I'm not going to kind of give you the answers now, but at the end, jot down who you think the answers are, and at the end we'll have, you can write in or speak up about who you think the answers to these questions are. So here's some questions to start with. Kick it off with a nice easy one. Who is the president of China? What are deemed as the 4 great inventions of China? And which was the last dynasty of China, running from 1644 to 1912? So there's three quick quiz questions. Like I said, at the end, when we come to the Q&A, I'll see who got them right, who knows them. Then I've made this slide specifically for you because one of those images you should all know really well, being that it is Manchester's sister city and you have an office there. I'm not going to tell you which one. So which cities are these associated with? 4 images. You hopefully can all see them and jot down. If we go from left to right to the bottom, so A, B, C, D, we'll go that way in the quiz. Give you a minute more to look at them and try and work out where they are. And I think it's an important point to note that not all cities have the same history, culture, development, status or importance in China. So it's similar to in the UK. Probably most people would know London and Manchester and Birmingham, but maybe don't know other places. So I think when dealing with China and Chinese people, they probably, luckily we're in Manchester, probably know where we are and they probably know about the football team. So I think that helps. Location, really important for knowledge for them. But I think we can be forgiven for not having the same detailed knowledge of China and Chinese cities in the same way that Chinese people viewing the UK probably don't know all the different places. But people from different cities are perceived in different ways. And again, I think that happens in the UK, but you have to be, I think, careful not to stereotype people from certain places. But I think there is a difference in attitudes, difference in mentality, personality, depending on which cities you're engaging with. I think it's good to learn about that and be aware of these sort of differences from city to city in a big country like China. These slides, the next slides, are sort of around geography and the maps and how maps are viewed. And again, there's a cultural significance to this, which I'll come on to in a minute. So this map is a world map as we in the West would draw a world map. The UK is fairly central to that, as you can see. Whereas this map is how Chinese would draw a world map. And as you can see, China is right in the center of the map. So I think that again, it's sort of culturally significant. And these characters are characters for China, which is Zhongguo. Zhong means middle, and Guo means kingdom. So China thinks of itself or names itself as the Middle Kingdom. So again, that's important, I think, to remember when thinking about Chinese perceptions of the world and the cultural importance of that. Here is a map of China with a number of tier 1 cities on it. Haven't got all the names of the cities, but briefly, I think kind of everyone probably should know the big 3 main ones: Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. And then the knowledge of all the other cities, I think, is where kind of people maybe know some things, maybe don't know others. In a bit of time, I'm going to come on to what makes a tier 1 city and a tier 2 city and a bit of the difference between it. And also I'm going to talk about kind of population density and development around these different cities. But I just wanted to put this map on the screen just so everyone can sort of see where the kind of key cities are located. The regions of China is typically divided into, roughly considered as having 6 regions. Here you can see a map with these different regions. There are 22 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, 4 municipalities, and 2 special administrative regions. So I think this again is kind of important just to have in the background to know the kind of the scale of China and the difference between different regions. Different provinces will have different policies. So in a way, it's more like the operation of, for example, like the United States, when it's kind of a state-by-state basis, people can make decisions, they can change, they can have implement policies in different ways. It's important to remember that governance of China is centralized from Beijing, but there are regional differences and different applications of policy depending on regional basis and provinces. So in the education kind of space and sector, this really does make a difference, because there are 6 key provinces that have most of the research and development funding in the whole of China, and they are the 6 provinces that have the most developed education systems. And there are also a number of provinces or areas where they view internationalization and development as being a higher priority, and they probably will have different policies to accommodate or to support different developments in those provinces or cities. So I think it's important to be aware of sort of the geography before looking at any strategy or any engagement. Languages, everyone just thinks, well, a lot of people just say to me often, oh, so you speak Chinese? And I say, no, I speak Mandarin. Because I think that people just assume that China's just, well, maybe it just has one language, Chinese. It doesn't, it has many, many languages. This map sort of shows that really well. In the kind of north and kind of north central area, Mandarin is sort of the dialect that is spoken, but Mandarin Chinese is the national language. So in every part of China, people are supposed to be able to speak good Mandarin Chinese, but that doesn't always be the case. So you may go to regions or parts of China where they don't speak great Mandarin, or it's a second language. So for example, in Wuhan, I've been in schools in Wuhan where all the walls are plastered in posters that say, please speak Mandarin, because all the kids at school are speaking Wuhan local dialect. So that's just just to give you an idea around language, and it's not completely standardized, even though people just assume it may be. This is about population density. You can see kind of the areas of high population density, and it is mainly around the coastal regions and around the 3 key rivers of China. So around the Yellow River in the north, the Yangtze River across the center, and the Pearl River, which is the Pearl River Delta in the south. So these are kind of the 3 areas historically that have had access to water, food, all the things you need to have a civilization. And that's why the cities sprung up around there. And that's why they are the heavily populated areas today, because that's kind of the resources are there. Let's get on to the next one. The next slide is about wealth density. So there's sort of 2 charts here. One of them is to do with on the left is to do with the high net worth individuals. The ones obviously in the blue, the darker shades of blue, have got more high net worth individuals, whereas the chart on the right hand side is a map with GDP per capita. And you can see that there are some anomalies. For example, Sichuan, Shandong, and Liaoning province are in the GDP kind of ranking not exactly great, fairly poor on average, but in the high net worth individuals kind of chart, they are doing really well. So it's important when considering a strategy of where to go in China and who to engage and where your customers are, to consider if they can afford your product or your service. And in this case, I think this is kind of an interesting thing to consider and to look at when thinking about partnerships or thinking about engaging with China. Is there may appear to be a great opportunity somewhere in the far north or in the far east, northeast, for example, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will be if the people can't afford the provision, for example. This is a chart showing middle class in China. China has the most number of middle class people per population in the world. Approximately 11% of the total population, which is just over 140 million people, are deemed as being middle class. And what does that mean, really? Well, it means that they normally have a house and a car and can afford a holiday at least once a year, typically overseas. But obviously, this is your target demographic. It's the Chinese middle class, which has been growing year on year, which I won't dwell on because there's since the reform and opening up, obviously there's been a growth in the boom in the middle class in China. I mentioned about the tiers of cities earlier. Lots of people just band around, oh, we need to go to tier 1 cities or tier 2 cities, or we should look at the tier 3 cities. But I sometimes think people don't really know what makes a tier 1 or a tier 2 city, and how there's different approaches and systems for tiering a city. So I've kind of put this slide together to show how the different tiers compare. There are 2 common systems for tiering cities that have been developed by South China Morning Post and Yicai. They both produce similar results, but there are slightly different metrics that are used for the tier of a city. But typically, the criteria can be kind of seen here. So a tier 1 city has over £300 billion of GDP, high disposable income, so a high number of middle class people, or deemed as being demographics middle class, at least 15 million people in population. So that obviously Beijing with 20 million people, Shanghai with probably 30 million people almost, kind of definitely fit the 15 million plus population category. High percentage of people in these tier 1 cities are university educated. International travel is common because obviously they have more disposable income. Higher cost of living, and therefore higher wages in those cities. And typically these cities have a large expat population or a large international population. And the difference between tier 1 and a tier 2 isn't that great, really. Slightly lower GDP, typically 5 to 15 million people in population. But again, they have a high percentage of university educated people. International travel is becoming increasingly common. Typically there is a lower cost of living, but not necessarily by that much today when you compare some of the larger tier 2 cities to the tier 1 cities. And again, a smaller international population, but again, that is changing because some of these tier 2 cities are getting a lot of foreign investment, a lot of internationalizing going on. So there are more international kind of people going to those cities. So that's the sort of tier 1 and tier 2 city breakdown. But there are obviously a growing number of tier 3 cities that are growing and are sort of becoming, turning into tier 2 cities, because the kind of government policies around urbanization and around kind of leveling up and improving these lower tier cities has been going on for a long time and has been seeing a lot of effects. So a lot of cities that were previously deemed as being tier 2 are now deemed as tier 1. So for example, Wuhan is seen as a new tier 1 city in some metrics. So I've got 3 slides to go through 3,000 years of Chinese history. So hopefully this won't be too challenging for everyone. I'll try and whiz through it, just give you the background. So China has 3,000 to 5,000 years of history, one of the most ancient civilizations in the world. Some key dates are on this slide. I don't want to walk you through it, so everyone can just see them, read them. I think when looking at China and China's kind of approach politically to the West, I think everyone needs to be aware of sort of the Qing dynasty onwards. With Manchu rule, they expanded their empire. They had a lot of trade at the start with Japan and Europe. But then sort of 1839, the first of the Opium Wars, kind of started what the Chinese deem as the century of humiliation. The British took Hong Kong. They signed the Treaty of Nanjing, which is known as the Unequal Treaties. And basically kind of caused the end of the Chinese dynastic system by sort of the Chinese mismanaged a lot of their finances and obviously had expensive wars to fight with Western powers like the British, the French. and that kind of caused a lot of discontent among the populace and caused sort of the end of the dynastic system. 1911, 1912 was the start of the Republic of China, and that period from 1912 to the founding of the PRC in 1949 was a very challenging period for China. Lots of wars, lots of civil war with the Japanese, So the founding of the PRC in 1949 brought stability to China. And I think another key date there is 1921, was when the founding of the Communist Party of China happened. So next year, 2021, is the 100th anniversary of the CPC foundation. So that's the key date in the Chinese calendar. And then after that, the next key date in the Chinese calendar will be 2049, because that will be the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the PRC. Obviously, from 1949 to 76, there's some trouble politically, Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution, famine. Mao died in 76, and then from 78 onwards, Deng Xiaoping began the reform and opening up policy. So to kind of turn a very kind of Soviet-style economy and very kind of agrarian economy into a more kind of capitalist system. But obviously China has a different take on that, and I'm not going to get into that too much. But Chinese kind of socialism with capitalism mixed together. And in 1980, the one-child policy started, and in 2016 that was changed to be a two-child policy. But because China's got wealthier, that hasn't had the same uptake that the Chinese government thought it would with regard to the number of people wanting to have that second child. So there's obviously a demographic challenge in China. There's a rapidly aging population. There are not enough young people because of the one-child policy to support that aging population. So I think that's, again, an important consideration for demographics, and to think about that and when that happened and when it ended. And then into the 90s, 1991, the first McDonald's opened in China. 1997, handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China. 99, the Macau sovereignty transfer. So by this point, China started to get back all the bits it lost during the century of humiliation. And then in 2001, China was admitted to the WTO. And from that point on, I think the Chinese economy really has grown massively, and is obviously now the second largest economy in the world. There's some other key events here, obviously the 2008 Beijing Olympics, which the Chinese people deemed being a key milestone in their development as a nation. 2012, Xi Jinping has taken over the presidency. Oh, I've given the answer to the quiz. Oh no, sorry. My quiz question tripped it up, write that down. And then, like I said earlier, 2016, formal end of the one-child policy and the G20 summit in Hangzhou. I haven't got any information past then, but there's obviously, I imagine people are more up to date with more recent events between UK, China, US, trade war, etc., etc. So I won't go into that. Chinese language. For those that aren't too familiar with the Chinese language, it's has a non-alphabetic writing system, so it uses characters. It's tonal. Traditional versus simplified script is a key point, because in the mainland PRC, everyone uses simplified script, whereas in Hong Kong, people still use traditional characters and use Cantonese. So that's a different, and in Taiwan as well, people still use traditional characters. But normally everything in the mainland is done in simplified. So that was a way of making kind of the peasants be able to learn to read and write better. That was the idea why they simplified the script. And yeah, that has happened since kind of 1949. Chinese characters, typically you need to know 2,000 to 3,000 characters to be able to read a newspaper, but if you're deemed as being educated, you're at 8,000 characters, but there are about 20,000 characters in a dictionary, and there are over 50,000 characters in existence. So that kind of gives you a flavor of how different it is to English in order to be able to use it as a functional language. And characters always contain, with the radicals, a hint of meaning, and sometimes can contain a hint of how to pronounce it, but not always. So it's challenging to learn because of that, as a as a Western English, native English speaker. I'm going to quickly do some basics of place names just to show how Chinese sort of works. It's a very literal language. So Beijing is the northern capital. So north and capital go together to make Beijing. Shanghai is, Shang means on or above, and hai means sea, so it means it's on the sea. So quite straightforward. Nanjing is southern capital, so Nan is south and Jing again is capital. So you can sort of see the literal use of kind of combining characters and makes meaning. 3 phrases for everyone to be able to engage with some basic conversation when you meet a Chinese partner or someone in China if you go to China. The kind of key ones: ni hao is hello, zai jian is goodbye, and xie xie is thank you. And again, you can see the literal use of these 3 characters. So ni hao is literally you, good. Zai jian is goodbye, which is literally again see, and xie xie is literally thanks. The character hao is also an interesting one, because this radical here is nu, which is female, and this radical here is zi, which is son. So if a female has a son, that is good. So that's kind of historical, cultural use and building it into the language. So then I'm going to come on to sort of some of how to navigate China, how to understand the market, what are some of the factors at play in UK-China relationship, and then how that might impact on your work and your dealings with China, dealings with Chinese people. So I've got some macro factors on the left-hand side. So US-China trade war is a big one. That's having impact globally on the global economy. It's having impact on us in the UK and our policies towards China as a government. What will the impact of Brexit be on UK-China relations? There was the talk prior to Brexit that we'll be able to have a different trade relationship, maybe a free trade agreement, maybe do more business with China as part of the global Britain agenda. The golden era of UK-China relations, lots of articles this week about how that is gone, and it's now in a deep freeze. After the announcement about Huawei on, I think, Tuesday, was it? So that's had an impact, and there's obviously the way that it's been played by the British government is that they had no choice but to listen to what the US said because we're their ally. So again, that's the way it's trying to been like sort of played or handled to try and reduce the fallout. COVID-19 related geopolitics is obviously a big one. You don't need to just open a newspaper, you can see every day that there's something around COVID-19 and geopolitics kind of in kind of the news. Tensions in big tech. So China has obviously rapidly improved and enhanced its technical capabilities, its innovation, and it's kind of the US are worried that it might overtake them. So there's obviously increased number of tensions around that. Security sensitivities and negative lists. China is trying to remove kind of make the negative list with regard to what foreign investment can have in China, what's removing market access barriers to kind of foreign investors. So there's been a number of changes recently around kind of what industries are permitted to be kind of allowed when you set up a foreign-owned entity in China and what are not. So we're kind of in the kind of education space, we're sort of watching this space because we hope and we kind of that at some point kind of training will be allowed as part of your WFI in China, because currently if an education entity and you have a WFI, you can't do actual training through that WFI, but in future there is a chance that will be kind of changed so you can add training to the scope of your business license. So it's kind of a fluid, changing situation, but over the last few years China has been trying to basically remove some of the red tape and the kind of the issues regarding what foreign companies can invest in, and the new foreign investment law that was released in January this year kind of is attributed to that. It's tried to remove a lot of barriers. And then onto some micro factors, cultural differences and language barriers. I've sort of tried to cover those so far in this presentation, but I just want to draw your attention to them as well. There are cultural differences, there are language barriers between doing business in China. There's a lot of misunderstanding because of that. Time zones is an important one. China is 7 or 8 hours ahead of the UK, depending on time of the year in the UK. Border and travel restrictions, obviously at the moment no one can go to China, but in the normal circumstances it's fairly, not such an issue. But the regulatory environment is also, like I said, sort of changing, and it's been changing a lot rapidly and has been improving under most circumstances. And IP protection is key. I think a lot, historically, everyone was worried that China was going to steal that IP, but that's not actually necessarily 100% of the truth. It's more complex than that. And it's very important. And there are a lot more kind of ways to ensure your IP is protected, and a lot more mechanisms now through Chinese courts to actually enforce the sort of legal kind of, related things related to IP and IP protection. Here's some kind of challenges for dealing with China. China is far away. I've already mentioned the time difference. And then, the language is a big one. And legislation and interpretation of contracts that are presented in Chinese is something you need to be aware of when doing business in China, if you're kind of contracting in Chinese with a Chinese entity, to make sure that, you're fully aware of what's in those contracts and how they're going to be enforced. Confucian values is, I think, really important to be aware of when kind of culturally when looking and doing business with China. So here I've got some of the kind of the key ones here. I'm going to go through them quickly. Reciprocity, so do unto others as you would have do unto you, and win-win. So you often hear Chinese people talking a lot about win-win agreements, win-win situation. It's kind of linked into this idea of reciprocity and like kind of making sure that, what you're doing is beneficial for both parties, mutually beneficial. Etiquette is important. I've got a few slides in a minute I'm going to come on to around kind of giving gifts and people wanting to be a good host. So I think that that's the same in both cultures, that people want, if someone comes to do a business with you, you want to be seen as being a good host. Benevolence is important. So seriousness, generosity, sincerity, diligence, and kindness are all deep values. And they sort of link into this idea of kind of your face, having faith, the idea of faith. So it's a difficult concept, I think, to kind of get from in the West, but it's the idea of this external appreciation of individual developed by the actions of the individual. So through their positions, their deeds, or their wealth, they will have this face. So you don't want to lose face, or you don't want to cause someone inadvertently to lose face, because that's like culturally a problem. And this idea of guanxi, which is very difficult for a Westerner to go to China and be able to build guanxi. We don't have the tools or the kind of the ability to be able to really do that. But it's a very complex kind of system of actively maintaining multi-strand relationships. So people will it's often important to be aware of what the kind of the relationships between people in the room are, or who has guanxi with who, and kind of just being able to kind of, I think, read the situation. If you were to do something that might impact upon somebody's face, or make them lose face, or mean that their guanxi is damaged, then I think that's something just to be thinking about and just to be aware of. Conducting business in China, so kind of business meetings. I've kind of summarized some of the key things here. So when handing over business cards, it's really important to do it with two hands. It's really important to ask people how they want to be addressed, and it's really important to take time to actually read their business card. In the West, I think we have a habit of just taking it with one hand and sticking it in our pocket and not reading what's on it, which is really kind of disrespectful to a Chinese person. It's important to have that, see who they are, what they do, and be able to then address them if you're in a meeting with their title. So obviously, so doctor, professor, etc., like Mr., even Mrs., Miss, whatever. I think it's important to use that. Ask people how they want to be addressed, so you don't cause any offence. And connecting, these days everyone uses WeChat, so I think it's really important to connect with people on WeChat, and that's sort of, in a way, there's kind of a mixture of people. Business cards have become sort of less important because everyone wants to join and scan your WeChat groups and kind of message through that channel and that platform. Gift giving is really important. I know in the UK we have this idea of, if you're giving gifts to people, it must be like, you need to be careful, it's anti-corruption and you bribing them. but in the Chinese sense, it's not. I don't think it has anything to do with that. It's not that meaning at all. It's a memento. It has a valuable meaning. It's something that to show kind of appreciation for the host for having you, for hosting you. So often, and there's often mutual kind of gift giving at events. So I think it's important. It's almost like an important part of a business event, just to kind of have that period where people unwrap the gifts, take photos, share them, and kind of it's a way of kind of building the relationship. So I think that's again really important to also know, like the kind of the level of gifts or who you're going to meet, to make sure you don't give them the kind of wrong gifts. There are also a lot of faux pas and gifts you cannot give people. Unfortunately, the British government a few years ago did go on a delegation and give someone a clock, and you cannot give people a clock in China, because if you songjong, it's to do with funerals and death, and it's got really kind of bad kind of meaning. So just make sure you kind of brush up and know what gifts are acceptable and what gifts are not acceptable before you go to a business meeting and give someone a gift. I think kind of small talk is really important when talking to people, trying to communicate with people. I think it's important not just to also like direct communication to a translator or a junior colleague just because they happen to speak English. Try and make eye contact and address any communication with the kind of the people you want to talk to, even if the translator then has to come in and help, or you have to kind of muddle through a little bit. It's really kind of, there's some key things to talk about that are okay. So I've kind of listed these here: family, education, sport, food, travel, property prices, fashion, local culture. It's fine. These things can all be also translated fairly easily, and there's less kind of worry about causing any offence or upset. Typically avoid politics as a topic, although often people will ask you what your views are about Brexit, about Trump, or about the COVID-19 pandemic, or about what's going on in Hong Kong. I've had people ask me those questions. I think you have to try and answer them if you're willing to. But I think don't try and start a conversation around those sort of difficult topics that people may not want to talk about. Humor does not translate easily from English to Chinese and can often get lost in translation. Self-deprecation is also difficult and can get lost in translation. And health issues, don't talk about your health or someone's health, because people can deem that it's kind of a bad omen, or it's going to mean they get sick. Again, some kind of more points around business meetings. I just covered a couple of them in the previous slide without realizing. But in normal situation, pre-COVID, a handshake in China would be much lighter than a handshake in the West. We'll see if it goes back to that in the future. Try and dress relatively smart, but it depends on who you're meeting. If you're asked, have you eaten? It's a common greeting in Chinese, Ni Chi Fan Le Ma. So it's not a strange thing to be asked, have you eaten, at any time of the day. Don't bow to people, but when you sort of have meals, there is a way of kind of cheersing, where you hit the glass kind of lower down on that other person's glass if they are more senior or hierarchically more important than you. So that's an important thing to remember. Often, even the big boss will try and kind of do that lower to you as a sort of joke, but I think it's good to be aware of these little things. Often the host will put food on your plate. So in China, kind of eating is communal. They often will have chopsticks that are only for serving the food, but they will often try and kind of put food on your plate. And I think if you're adventurous and willing to try it, that's great. If you're not, then you don't have to eat it just because they put it on your plate. But I think it's just important just to be aware and not be kind of shocked when people start trying to feed you up. It's different to the UK. There's no tipping culture, and it's kind of rude to leave a tip. So don't just try and leave like extra coins at the end of or notes at the end of your meal. But also typically now people are moving to kind of digital payments. So through WeChat, people will be paying for things. So it's not the same as leaving a tip would have been historically, where you've had extra money in your pocket. Business cards, I've already sort of mentioned about that. Like, make sure your business cards aren't not bent up or scrawled up, and don't put them in your pocket without, like, make sure you get a business card holder to actually put your business cards in so you can keep them neat, and don't don't cause offence that way. Communication issues, I'm going to quickly go over this. In Chinese, there are lots of different ways to say yes. So throughout kind of business negotiations or meetings, or trying to kind of get to the bottom of a project or a partnership or something, people will often they'll just say yes, even though they don't actually, what they think of as yes, even though they don't necessarily mean yes. So this sort of here, we've got shoulda, which kind of means correct or yes, dui, which means correct, meizuo, which means it's not wrong, keyi, which means we can do that, that's called can, hao, which means good or yes, xing also means kind of okay, dangran means correct, so like that can also be translated as yes, and meiwenti, which is sort of no problem. So Chinese people often would just say yes in English, but actually there's more complexities to all of these different words, and whether they actually really mean yes or not is debatable. Kind of have to ask open-ended questions in order that you can't just get yes, no answers, because it's too easy just to say something that that can only be answered yes or no, and you won't actually get a detailed understanding of what the situation actually is. And there's some communication challenges which I've kind of got here. So scenario one, only some of my questions are answered. Now, why might this be? Well, you might have asked and posed multiple questions or multiple issues in one go. So it's become confusing as to what the key point is. Your questions may not be in any kind of logical order. It might just be a bit scattergun, and that's, again, difficult, I think, for people to deal with if it's not their native language. You might have many updated or amended emails, or they just might not want to continue the conversation, but they're kind of in a situation where they can't back down or can't say no at this point. A solution would be to make sure all your emails have subjects, make sure it's kind of concise. Bullet points and tables are really important, I think, to express your what you want to achieve and what you want to do. Try and explain the context of your questions if you're actually having a conversation with someone, not an email, and consider all issues to be raised, and make sure that if you're dealing with Chinese colleagues at an institution or a business, for example, that the right colleagues are aware, because often kind of junior colleagues won't have any ability to make a decision, won't be able to really continue the conversation at all. So it's really important just that senior colleagues are copied in, or the key decision makers are copied into any communication, so that they can actually see that that's going on. Another scenario is that a counterpart has agreed to do something but haven't actually done it yet, and it's dragging on for a long time, and you're concerned as to why it's not actually happened. Some of the causes of this might be that yes didn't actually mean yes. So they maybe had a meeting and they said yes, but they didn't actually fully understand what it entailed or what they were saying yes to, or they don't actually want to do it, but they kind of don't want to say no. So I think that's, again, something to be aware of. So the reason for this may be that the counterpart doesn't want to change their answer from yes to no at this point, and maybe they're not the decision maker. So maybe they said yes, but they didn't really have the authority to say yes. So I think it's important, the solution for this is to understand the motivation of a counterpart for what you're trying to do or achieve. So try and think about what the benefit is for them, and make sure you kind of know how you're sharing innovation. It's a kind of what new things are you doing, or how are you passing on like different kind of changes to things, how are you sharing this, and what's the benefit for them, why are they doing this? Is your counterpart the decision maker? Well, if they're not, then probably their yes could not be acted on, so they needed to get kind of escalated to someone to actually make the decision. And then what's the solution to this? Make sure the decision maker actually gets it, forward to them, copy to them, etc. Okay, I think I'm this is my final slide. This is one of my favorite Chinese idioms, and it kind of is linked to what I've just been talking about regarding decision makers and people saying yes when actually they kind of mean maybe or no, but they don't want to say it. And so this one is qi hu nan chao, which means when you're riding a tiger, it's hard to dismount. So the idea behind this is that when you're stuck in a difficult situation, all you can do is continue onwards and do your best to achieve your goals. So this is kind of why I think often when British companies or organisations are dealing with Chinese companies or organisations, there's this kind of period where you may have started the conversation with a junior member of staff or someone who's not the decision maker, but they will kind of carry on and carry on and carry on until there's a point where they're sort of, they have to make a decision and say yes or no, and actually then progress to the next stage of the discussion. Often we get a lot of people saying, oh, we've had all these meetings. We went to China once and we had a meeting and then nothing happened. And it's the sort of, I often question, why did nothing happen? What did you try and do? Why did you not manage to get it to the next step and the next stage? And it may have been simply this, that at the time of the meeting, everyone was having a nice time and someone said yes, but that person didn't actually have the authority to say yes. And then when it comes out in the wash later on, that they basically were, riding the tiger and unable to get off. So that's all my slides. I think I've run through them in about half an hour, 40 minutes. Right? But yeah, happy to take any questions or have a bit of discussion, and yeah, happy to kind of go through the quiz answers, although I do realise I gave you one of the answers by mistake. So yeah, should we go through the quiz answers first, and then we can take any questions. So the quiz questions. Who's the president of China? I don't know, do you want to type them in the chat box, or should I just tell you the answers?
Or people can unmute themselves, yell out.
Typing.
People typing.
Let's have, if people feel brave enough to shout out, to hear people's pronunciation. I'm not shouting. Or type in the boxes.
Okay, well done to Martin has written Xi Jinping, and so that was very good. Anyone else got the other answers? Gunpowder is one of them, paper is another one. Not the abacus or money. Printing is another one. Okay, we've got 3. Not silk. The compass, yay, final one. So that between you, we've all got there. The printing press, gunpowder, paper, and the compass are deemed as being the 4 great inventions. Last dynasty of China, anyone? Again, I think I went through, the Qing bit. I went through that in the history. So again, I gave another answer, didn't I? And then the cities, or the cities that these are associated with. Anyone recognize these pictures? Yeah, Chengdu is where the pandas are. Wuhan is where the crane tower is. Beijing is the Great Wall. It's sort of within the city limits, so that does count. No, the third one I think is a difficult one. I might just tell you the answer for the third one. It's not Shanghai or Guangzhou. Anyone else? The third one is actually Chongqing. That's near to Jiefang Bay in Chongqing, which is sort of key landmark in Chongqing. But yeah, well done, everyone got 3 out of 4, so that's good. I think that's it, right? I don't think I had any other quiz questions anywhere. So thanks everyone. I'll stop sharing my screen and feel free to ask any questions about what I presented, or have a chat about anything you want to talk about. While we've got a bit of time.
Hi Tom, this is Head of International Partnerships. I just wanted to say something about what you think the impact of the situation with Hong Kong might be. You mentioned some of the other political situations going on at the moment, but not Hong Kong. That'd be really useful.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ian. I think it's too early to say what the impact will be with Hong Kong and also with Huawei. I think those are the 2 kind of main issues with regard to the UK-China relationship at the moment. I think the kind of, from my perspective, the fact that the Huawei decision has been sort of as a result of American sanctions on using American IP, and that's the reason that the change has been made because of American policy. It may be a positive. It wasn't just a decision that the UK just made on its own. I think the Hong Kong situation is very challenging. obviously with the offers of giving everyone with a BNO passport a way to move to the UK, has kind of got China's backup. But I think that sort of is kind of going to be in the background for a long time, and probably won't be something that the Chinese just kind of indiscriminately sanction the UK for. Also, another positive is I think that the US relationship with China and the Australian relationship with China are a lot worse than the UK relationship with China at the moment. So we're not like kind of top of the list when it comes to in the sights for kind of Chinese sanctions or sort of issues around that. But yeah, that's sort of my personal take on what the impact might be of the Huawei and the Huawei decision on the Hong Kong situation. But I'd be interested to hear what other people think.
Tom, can I just follow up on Ian's question? And I think we understand what the political position on Hong Kong is from obviously the party. What's your perception on the people's view? Do people in China, in mainland China, have a view on Hong Kong, or are they just sort of reading what they're obviously being told in the news?
Well, I think people in China have always thought Hong Kong was always part of China, and that we stole it from them in the 1800s, and they finally got it back in 1997, and that they can do what they want with it because it's part of their country. So I think that is the issue. I think is the international kind of, when the British handed back Hong Kong, there were UN agreements in place with regard to the one country, two systems, and then with the changes to this security law, it's perception is that that's eroded a lot of those freedoms, a lot of the legal footing that were agreed as part of the one country, two systems sort of system and handover. So I think that's the bigger issue. It's that in kind of a legal perspective, clearly what they've done is changed to basically make Hong Kong another city in China. Although it was quite amusing, I saw this week the Chinese are going to change their taxation laws so that they're going to become more like America and clamp down on kind of basically double tax people overseas. So if you're a Chinese national living overseas, you'll have to pay tax to obviously the country that you're in and to China, back to China. And there was an article I saw regarding Hong Kong, and all the Chinese people in Hong Kong were very upset because the double taxation laws would apply to them in Hong Kong, even though obviously Hong Kong, as far as they're concerned, is part of China. So that's going to cause, or potentially will cause, issues, and may see a lot of mainlanders leave Hong Kong to move back to the mainland, to places like, for example, Shenzhen or Guangzhou, because they don't want to have to pay double tax just to work in Hong Kong. So I think that might impact on what deems as the attractiveness to Chinese people to work in Hong Kong and keep Hong Kong as a separate sort of separate economy as part of the SAR that it is. So I think that's kind of a watch this space on that. It might be that through some of China's policies, it kind of makes Hong Kong less of an attractive place to get to live or work for its own people. So I think that's something to kind of watch. And obviously, I think for the UK, we'll see a lot more in the short term, Hong Kong students wanting to come to the UK through any means necessary to study, and then to kind of if they want to afterwards move here, they probably will. But I think we've always had that, I think, relationship with Hong Kong. I don't think that's going to stop. Just because of this change in sort of legal standing and the Hong Kong security law. And I think also we need to see how the law is actually implemented, because when you read it, it's quite scary, but will they actually enforce it to the letter of the law or not? It's to be wait and see again, isn't it? I think it's again too early to kind of make assumptions of what it might look like, because it's quite a complex situation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom.
Can I change the subject?
Yeah, go for it.
So obviously, sort of in my line of work, if you like, I've been to China a few times. I've several business meetings with China. The one thing I've always felt slightly uncomfortable with when we have maybe visitors to us, or usually actually visitors to us, sitting around the table, and actually the question I want to ask is, what do you want? So is there a sort of a polite way of trying to get to the point without everybody smiling at me? I think you've all been there as well. So how do you broach that? And also the flip side to that is, how do you say, no, we're not interested? So to cut meetings short, to cut conversations short potentially. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that if you're going to go for dinner with someone and like build that relationship, that's not the place to discuss business. That is the place to build the relationship and to basically become friends with them. So in Chinese culture, you don't do business with people that are not your friends, is sort of the approach. Even if you're not like the best friend, they'll still want to deem you as their friend. So I think that building of relationships and basically making friends with the people you're going to do work activities with and business with is sort of really key. So those first meetings or that first meal or two is not the place to get down to the nitty gritty. That's the place to try and give a good impression, show that you've got where your strengths are as an institution, what sort of things you might be interested in doing as a very vague kind of broad stroke approach. And then following on from that meeting or those dinners in China or those meetings, then you come back and then you actually say, right, we actually want to do X, Y, and Z. Are you interested? So I think, you have to invest that time at the start. You can't just pick up the phone, for example, and say, do you want to do X, Y, Z? You have to, I think, try and build a relationship, or at least appear to be building a relationship with them before you can get to the bottom of what it is you're actually going to do and can we do it or not? So I think that's kind of, there's a lot of initial work that has to go into it before you can get to that point of saying what are we doing here? Can we do this? So I think it's important just to, before you go for those meetings or before you have those conversations, to be in your mind, actually we really want to work with this institution, or really want to work with these people or this company, so we're going to go and invest some time to try and get to know them. I think that's how you have to take that standpoint. You can't just you can't just go around and have a meeting and a call with dinner with everyone. You can't, that's not possible. So I think that's different in the way the business happens in business in the UK happens, where you can sort of, you want to have a business meeting and straight away you're just like, right, what are we doing? Can we do this? Yes or no? Okay, thanks, bye. So that's the very, very different approach to business, and I don't think you can get away from that or escape that. And I think it's important to not to go and have dinner with someone or have a meeting with someone if you think that you don't want to work with them, or what they may have to offer might not match what you want. I think you need to be really clear at that start point before you invest your time meeting them, talking to them. Is this something we want to do? Who are they? Do your research, do your due diligence. Make sure you're not just going for a meeting with some random company or random institution, for example.
So the legwork research you do beforehand is all important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of fundamental to what it is you're trying to do, and going there knowing that you're going for dinner or meeting, but you know that in a few weeks' time you want to start the next stage to discuss whatever it is you want to discuss. But that sort of, you have to go and have that initial engagement to be able to get to that stage down the line is, I think, really important to be aware of, and just not see it as a oh, why can't we talk about business in this meeting? Why am I wasting my time? See it as, okay, I have to be nice, friendly, and positive about them, and kind of shower some praise on them and say, oh yeah, it's great, you're great, we'd love to work with you, etc., etc. To then get to the point where you can have that conversation.
Yeah. So Tom, sorry, Annie.
No, go Ian.
Do you think that makes any kind of thought of moving to a more remote working style, online development of relationships, virtually impossible in China, where you still need that face-to-face contact?
I think it makes it difficult. I think that you could do, if you already have a relationship with someone, managing it virtually is fine. But building that initial relationship, I think, is really difficult virtually. I think you have to have that face-to-face engagement. You have to go to the banquets. You have to basically become friends with the people you're trying to work with, to friends in inverted commas, I think, really. And then from that you can then do the business. So I think, but if you've got existing relationships, you can definitely manage them virtually. You don't have to be in China every 5 minutes to see those people. You can talk to them on WeChat, you can have a video call with them, you can manage the relationship and the project remotely. But I think it's very difficult to do new business development without being in China and having some meetings at least, and some meals, and then kind of following on, and you can probably then follow on virtually. So I think it'd be really hard if you said to me, Tom, can you find us some people that want to work with us and we can only have a video call with them? I think that would be, yeah, almost impossible.
Certainly my opinion, and I just think we need to all be aware of that when we're looking at working more remotely around the world. And in some places that might be easier. If we were working in, say, Germany, for example, it might be that we could do things by video call much more easily. But I think in China that would be quite challenging. That was certainly my thought as well.
Can I just add on that, actually? So whilst we can't kind of meet Chinese companies, businesses in person, CBBC does have a network of 13 offices in China. So while China is opening up and while there may be some localized lockdowns, we do have staff there. So if you may not be able to send your own team over there, or you might, if you need someone on the ground to go and meet someone for you, that is always an option. So you can just reach out to Tom and I, and we can speak to our local colleagues and try and support you on the ground.
Yeah, I think there will be a lot more of people. You guys obviously are lucky with having your office in Wuhan. You've got colleagues in Wuhan. You can send them to do the meetings, to the meals, to the building. They're trying to build a relationship, and then sort of video call yourself into a conversation. I think that would be an approach that would work. But I don't think you could just call necessarily from the UK to China directly via video call and have that kind of relationship building happening. But like Isabel said, we have colleagues in China that can also help you. But I do know you've got Young in Wuhan or whatever, who can go and have these meals, discussions, and try and build a relationship with people before you then when time is right to actually go and meet them in person. I think that is really important. So when China opens up again to travel, I think that you'll be able to get back to normal. But I think just like I said, it's difficult to from scratch just pick up the phone or have a video call and build that relationship in the same way that you would have done previously.
Okay, thanks very much.
I think Natalie had a follow up there as well.
Oh yeah, I did. So Tom, I went to China for the first time last November, and when I went very much on the kind of with the thinking that it would be just a matter of kind of like meeting people and introducing myself, my area of work, and that probably the second visit would end up with something more concrete happening. However, because I was meeting people who had met other people from Manchester Metropolitan, I really felt like, because that good relationship had already been cemented by other colleagues, and people automatically had a good opinion of me. And so there was actually a lot more progress than I'd ever anticipated. Do you think that's kind of a usual, that it's not just about relationships individually, it's also about the institutional relationship building?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely the idea of you have obviously a brand or a reputation, and if you've done work with people that they know, or with that institution or with that company before, for example, they will be more receptive to meeting another colleague from that organization for sure. So I think that's definitely, they kind of you have that trust. Your colleagues have already built that trust with them previously, and you're just following on and maybe carrying out some work in a slightly different area. But that's definitely, I think, how it works. I think, like I was saying before, you can't just kind of go and meet a company or an institution you've never met before and expect to have that sort of reception or relationship already in place. So I think that's a really good example of why it's important to build those relationships. Sorry, I think Rochelle, there's a queue for questions. Rochelle's got one and then Keith's got one. So Rochelle, go next.
Hi Tom, hi Isabel. Yes, I'm the Head of International for Arts and Humanities. I've very much enjoyed this session. Thank you. My question is, again, a slightly different topic, but you talked about business cards. And I suppose my question is about getting, if we're getting our business cards translated, firstly, is it really appreciated that our business cards are translated? But then also when it comes to names, or it seems a bit of a dilemma, should you have a sort of a translation that helps them to verbalize your name, or should you have a translation that's a made up name? I'm just wondering if you have any advice, because I got a bit paralyzed about which way to go.
I think it's really important to have your kind of job title and your name in Chinese on a business card, for those colleagues that don't speak English or don't know what you are and what you do. I also think there's a real challenge around universities, people's roles and the sort of Chinese translation of their role. It's very easy in China to have sort of a dean and then an assistant dean, and then they link into a vice chancellor type level. So there's not much. I think there's a real confusion for Chinese perspective as to how UK institutions operate and whose job title is what and what they do. So it's obviously like director, it's fairly easy to translate, and dean is fairly easy to translate. And obviously like a head of international is fairly easy to translate. But anything apart from that, I think it's really difficult to get what you do into a business card translation of a job title. I think that's something to be really aware of.
Well, I mean, just on that topic, I do actually feel a bit of concern about our job titles as heads of international, because as you say, the counterpart at other institutions would be something like an associate dean. And I'm concerned that our job titles don't, there's confusion between people who work in faculties as an associate dean would versus our colleagues in the international office. I find that our job titles, we're in faculties, but our job titles of heads of international, I've had a lot of confusing conversations with people not understanding that. So that I do think that's an issue.
Yeah, and then the thing about the name, my Chinese name is not related to my actual English name at all. And I think it's a bit, but I think it's a different one because I speak Chinese and I can explain why I've got the name I've got, and it's more of a topic of conversation. Whereas if you're just going to a business meeting and you've got like a Chinese name that's really odd on your, like they won't know where it's come from on your business card, I don't think that will necessarily work. So I think often people would kind of sound transliterate their name on their card, just so if you put it in English with a sound transliteration in Chinese characters, so people can see your name, English name, and then kind of a guide as to how do I pronounce this, or how do I translate this. I don't know. I think that can sometimes work fairly well. But I think I don't think it necessarily matters which way you do it. But I do think it's for me it's a bit odd if you have like this Chinese name that you don't know why you've got it or how you've got it or how you you can't explain it to people. I think that's strange.
I agree. No, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Could you tell us what your Chinese name is as an example, and could you also we obviously come into contact with lots of people that are using English names. Is there some way in which Chinese colleagues choose their English names?
No, I think it's they choose their English names, or their teachers choose their English names normally from when they're studying English from a young age. So you get people like called Tiger and Orange and all sorts of crazy names because they like tigers or they like oranges or whatever. So there's no like way of doing that, the name situation. My Chinese name is Lei Zheyong, and the Lei sort of is thunder and it sounds a bit like clay. So my teacher at university gave me that surname because it sounded a bit like part of my surname. But that was the only reason. So there's sort of you can sort of sound transliterate to a degree, like what your surname might be or what your name might be, and then obviously use that as part of your name for sure. As that's a kind of, I think, another way of like getting your name into something that can be explained to a Chinese person, or a Chinese person can understand if they see your English name next to a Chinese name. I think that's quite a good way of doing it. So yeah, a bit of working on it. Your name and why it's the way it is always good. I think some context, if you have a name in Chinese, I think is important. Sorry, Keith, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask the question about translations. I mean, it does tend to, how can I put it, make meetings last longer. The translations, I mean, we're quite fortunate. Usually we have pretty good translations, and I travel with a Chinese colleague who can really sort of get the message over to me very quickly. But is there any protocol that works best or quickly or efficiently in terms of getting translations done?
So you want like interpretation of meetings, so interpreting meeting. No, I don't think there's necessarily a best way of doing it. Typically, I think you'd have someone who can sort of act as a simultaneous interpreter to a level, so that and can do things, and also who understands what you're talking about. I think the big issue with interpreting in China is often that people, if you've got colleagues that can do it, that's great, because they'll understand what your university courses look like, what education in the UK looks like, wonderful. But it's when you hire like a third-party interpreter, and they end up in a business meeting where they don't actually know the context of what they're trying to talk about or translate, is really a challenge. And that's where you can obviously get mistranslations or misinterpretations of things. So that's something I think it's important to, if you're hiring an interpreter or someone to do translation, is to make sure that they actually have some understanding of the sector they're operating in. I think that's really important, because if you're talking about kind of complex topics, then a normal, just a run-of-the-mill kind of interpreter won't necessarily be able to deal with the context of it. And I think it's also really a challenge to basically to interpret. I've been in that situation where I've been expected to be able to interpret something just off the bat in Chinese and English, and I don't necessarily know the vocabulary. Spend your time in a dictionary trying to work out what's going on. So it doesn't help. That's not going to help if the meeting be fluid, basically.
Yeah, no, we've had that problem. I should have said at the start, very interesting session, Tom, as well. I enjoyed it, but that sounds about right. And we have tied ourselves in knots over some, sort of fairly obscure bits of academic discipline at times, but we get there in the end.
Can I just add to what Keith's saying there? Just for those of you who've had less experience in China. So we have a variety of different ways of doing this. So with interpreting. So in sort of lower level meetings, it might be that somebody from the partner university translates for us, maybe from their international office. So it's done on quite an informal basis where the interpreting is less important, that it's 100% accurate, maybe. Whereas if we're going in with a higher level meeting, it might be that we have a professional interpreter there, which is obviously more expensive. But then also if we've had sort of more very, very high level meetings with VIP guests and so on, then we might have simultaneous interpreting, but that can be very expensive. So we would sort of reserve that for higher level things. So we've got a different sort of variety of ways of doing it depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, if you ever need any help finding translators and interpreters, we can help at CBBC. So if you're ever struggling, I don't know, if you're in a city that you've not been in before, you don't know where to find an interpreter in that city, we can definitely assist with that. So
that could be useful.
That in mind.
Outside of Wuhan, that might be useful for us.
Yeah. Okay.
I just had one other thing on to that, Annie. I don't know if you might want to say more about this, but I think it's important for us all to bear in mind as well, because this sometimes can be a problem, that people can sometimes assume that Chinese colleagues will do translating and interpreting for them when that's not their actual role. So whether they've got an academic role or another professional services role, just because they happen to be Chinese doesn't mean we should necessarily be asking people to do that for us if they have another role within the university.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it, as we all know, it is a skill. Either translating or interpreting is a skill. We occasionally ask colleagues in the China office to maybe proofread something for us, but I certainly wouldn't ask them to proofread a legal document, for example, so that it is a specialist skill. There was just one more question that I had, if you don't mind, and that's around networking. Now, obviously, networking in education is you go to conferences, etc., and it is a thing. I've only ever been to a couple of networking sessions in China, and one of them was we were invited by CBBC, and it's. How is there an approach to networking? I mean, this might be a topic of an entirely different conversation, but is there a protocol with networking? I mean, could maybe a more junior member of staff just walk up to a president of a university and say, "Hi, my name is," or is there some sort of formal introduction process?
I've done that before, but I do speak Chinese, so it's a bit different. But yeah. They're always surprised, like, "Oh, what's this foreigner coming up chatting Chinese to me?" Yeah, no, I think that's possible. I don't think China is very hierarchical, and typically you would normally need a senior colleague to be there and for like an introduction and for a networking event. So I think if there is someone who's a director level or senior academic colleague, they're much easier for them to be introduced to senior colleagues from institutions or from government, for example. than it is for a junior colleague to just do that. I think a junior Chinese colleague would probably have a problem doing that. Whereas a foreigner who speaks Chinese can just walk up and just be like, "Oh, hi," and just talk to them in Chinese. But that's not, that's definitely a breach of the protocol, so to speak. But you can kind of get away with it. I think China is very hierarchical when it comes to its work culture and job titles as well. Very, very important what you kind of touched on before, what your job title is, and then that sort of means what you can and can't do, and what you can and can't say, and your responsibility level, and you can't sort of go up, you tend to not go up above that or below that. So I think that's, whereas I think in the West we are more fluid with the roles we do and the work we do. Sometimes we might be doing more low-level admin work, but also something like doing much more senior level kind of support work, for example. And I think that doesn't necessarily happen in a Chinese context with companies. But there may be some scope for that to change. But I do think networking is definitely a challenge in China. I think you need a Chinese colleague normally, or someone who speaks Chinese, to be introducing you, even if they're not the one doing any kind of, if you have a translator interpreter with you, someone else, and that probably makes life even easier. So I think that's kind of an important thing to consider. It's difficult just walk up or ask junior colleagues just to walk up to someone senior and try and strike up a conversation. Normally, if you go to an event, someone will probably be introducing you. So for example, if we have a CBBC event in China, I've not been to one, but I would imagine that, for example, my colleague Wei Feng, who's like head of government relations in Shanghai, if you went to an event in Shanghai, Wei Feng would probably go and introduce, be the one leading that introduction, the initial introduction, saying, "Oh, this is our member, Manchester Metropolitan. This is what they want to do. Would you like to talk to them?" And trying to kind of make that introduction. I don't think you could, like I said, just walk up to someone and say, "Hi, I'm from Manchester Metropolitan. Can we talk business?" So I think that sort of is required.
So again, I think it's about the research as well. So Jenny and I, our Pro Vice Chancellor International, and I went to a CBBC one in Wuhan last August, and it was a last minute invitation. So we'd done no research, and we basically we actually are accompanying the Deputy Consul General there, and basically Jenny and I just sat for a couple of hours melting in the extreme humidity, but because we didn't really know who else was there, it was a very difficult networking experience for us, outside of the people that we actually already knew.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can help you avoid that in future, Annie. If you let us know if you're at an event that's someone from CBBC is out, they can introduce you to the people that they know there, for sure.
I think I stood for an hour in front of the fan drinking a warm beer.
Tom, is it possible to ask a question, changing the subject to a more coronavirus impact question? So what do you, so somebody who's probably in a better position to maybe advise on this, what do you see the impact of coronavirus having on sort of recruitment and sort of the UK sector as a whole, and how we might have to adapt to sort of meeting targets and changing strategies from this September onwards?
Okay, I personally think there'll be a hit for this September, because obviously a lot of students, the key decision maker is the parents. And the parents don't think it's safe to go overseas in the middle of a global pandemic, and also there's very limited amount of flights. So I know a lot of universities are talking about chartering flights, bringing people over. So that, because the cost of the flights that there are really expensive. So a student's going to want to spend thousands of pounds on a flight to the UK in the middle of a pandemic, and when parents don't think it's very safe. So I think that's the issue. I think if the kind of coronavirus can be contained, or there can be a vaccine within the next year or so, then we'll see a rebound the following September. But obviously I think there's kind of the bigger issues regarding what the fallout might be for, like we say, from Hong Kong or from Huawei. And obviously a few weeks back, China said that to people in China, do not go and study in Australia, it's not safe. Not safe because of coronavirus, and also we don't like Australia anymore, we've had too many fallings out, was basically the message. So Australia got put on the naughty list, and obviously America's already very much on that list, and has a lot of policies in place to make it very difficult for Chinese researchers to operate in America and go and study in America. And there's been a lot of news recently around they were trying to not let anyone study online, but then they've backed down because Harvard, etc., tried to sue the American immigration body. So I think if the UK kind of if there isn't a big fallout from these kind of geopolitical issues that are outside of our control, then I think that they will massively rebound back next year with the kind of student numbers and developments. But I also think there'll be more TNE kind of students wanting to stay in China for the short term, and obviously there's lots of options for them in like Nottingham Ningbo, Xianlu Jiaotong, etc., where they can start a UK degree, and then they might say after a year or two, oh, actually now I want to come to the UK. I originally wanted to come for a whole undergraduate, but now I do a first year in China or something like that. So I think that you'll see more students doing things like that. So if you've got flexible routes for them to not have to come to the UK right now, but join you later, then I think that's the way to address that challenge, basically. Because I just we've seen kind of horror stories in the press about how the future students will come this September. I don't think it's necessarily as bad as that's saying, but I do think the numbers will be down significantly to what it's expected, but then hopefully there'll be a rebound the following year if there's a vaccine, for example.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Right, I'm just quite conscious of time. I think
we're almost up.
3. I think
we're meant to finish now. Yeah.
So I think if I could say a big thank you to you, Tom, and Isabel as well for joining us. And I was actually going to say, Rochelle, that one thing that we miss on these online forums is we don't get to clap. So thanks from us. No doubt you'll be hearing a lot more from us all. That's very clever, Rebecca. Oh, and Rachel as well. So you'll no doubt be hearing a lot more from us. So thank you very, very much. It was really interesting, and even for people that have been engaging with China for some time, it's still there was definitely something there for everyone. So thank you very, very much.
No problem. I'm happy to do another session like this if other colleagues couldn't join this session. I said to Andy before, I'd happily do it again. Also, if you let me know if you want me to do anything that's more like kind of education specific, kind of policy related training, I can do that as well. Kind of you tell me what you want and I'll try and make it and do it to a degree. So this one I think was just kind of a general kind of introduction to culture and business culture, but do let me know if you want me to do anything else in the future.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks everyone.
Bye all. Thanks for joining everybody.
Thank you very much.